Well, good morning and welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Lisa Nicole Matthews, the 114th president of the National Press Club and assignment manager for U.S. Video at the Associated Press. I want to thank everyone for joining us both here at the club and those viewing online for our headliner event on the challenges of reopening live theater in America and more diversity on stage. For those of you watching today, we are happy to accept your questions, and I will ask as many as time permits. To submit a question, please email headliners@press.org and put theater in the subject line. And for those in the room, there have been cards that have been circulated for you to fill out for your questions. You know, some might say that when it comes to live theater, a long intermission is just ending. Before the pandemic struck, theater and live events in America delivered the most profitable year in history. In fact, according to the data from the National Endowment for the arts and cultural productions contributed $919 billion to the nation's economy in 2019. On Broadway, ticket sales broke records, with some productions generating more than $1 billion that year. Then COVID-19 hit, and by the end of March 2020, live theater came to a standstill along with everything else. The theater world has faced crises before: depressions, recessions, the September 11th terrorist attacks, HIV/AIDS, among others. Theater has always come back, but the question is, will it again? Broadway has reopened, and here in Washington, shows returned to the Kennedy Center, but what about the rest of the country? Before the pandemic, the entertainment industry was facing a reckoning on race and diversity. So the question is, could live theater come back to be more diverse and more inclusive? Our guests today, both of whom are actors and leaders in the arts community, have a lot to say about that and the path ahead for live theater. Kate Shindle is president of the Actors Equity Association, the National Union of Actors and Stage Managers. Ms. Shindle has appeared in Broadway productions, including Jekyll and Hyde, Cabaret, Legally Blonde, and Wonderland. And not long ago, she performed in the lead role just next door to the National Press Club at the National Theater in the touring production of the Broadway musical Funhouse. Sitting next to Kate is Britton Smith, an actor and president of the Broadway Advocacy Coalition. Britton is an adjunct professor at Columbia Law School. His Broadway credits include Be More Chill, Shuffle Along, and After Midnight. Earlier this year, the Broadway Advocacy Coalition, under his leadership, received a special Tony Award at the 2021 awards ceremony for the organization's advocacy work. So I want to welcome you back to the National Press Club, Ms. Shindle. So we're going to start with you. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. It is always an honor to be here, and I'm especially thrilled to be here with my friend Britton today. We met working on a show about three or so years ago, and that was when the world was right side up. And then when it turned upside down and I saw Britton rising into a stronger leadership position, I knew that our industry was in good hands. So we'll hear from him in a few minutes. As Lisa mentioned, I'm an actor by trade, and since May of 2015, I've been president of Actors Equity Association. We're the union that represents more than 50,000 actors and stage managers working in live theater across the country. So to state the obvious, these past 21 months have been unlike anything any of us have lived through before. For actors and stage managers, and frankly, for everyone in the live entertainment sector, this period has been incredibly and uniquely difficult. It's not an exaggeration to say that our industry shut down overnight, and it's not hard to understand why. The type of live performance that we traditionally do was not built to withstand COVID, or for that matter, any highly contagious and dangerous pandemic. For actors in particular, our work is often the definitional opposite of social distancing. We get close to each other, we sing in each other's faces, we partner to perform dances, we pass props all over the stage. I've said many times that I think it's the only workplace in which it's not only legal, but actually completely normal to have to kiss your coworker as a condition of your job. We are used to workplaces with communal coffee makers and water coolers and music stands, and some of these things are easy to fix in the context of a pandemic, but some of them are much harder. And in case that's not daunting enough, our livelihood also depends on the ability to gather an audience, sometimes a small group of people, sometimes several thousand, into closed indoor spaces, sometimes often in landmarked buildings whose ventilation may not have been updated in many years. So we're an industry that, in hindsight, seems tailor-made to be shut down by a highly contagious pandemic. And of course, that's what COVID did. Equity's actors and stage managers went from record employment in 2019 to 100% unemployment in March of 2020. And as devastating as that was, and continues to be, it was clear that it needed to happen. So anybody who went to the theater in that last week or two must have been aware, as I was, that it just wasn't safe at that moment. Every point of contact, every cough in the audience turned into a red flag. Knowing how sick some members of our community actually became in those early days and how harmful and devastating COVID can be over the long term to things like one's lungs, even if that person has recovered, leads me to believe that we would not only have been forestalling the inevitable if we delayed our shutdown, we probably would have made it worse. So what happened after that was a whirlwind, and without question, the most stressful and demanding time I have ever lived through. To be sure, actors and stage managers are used to having downtime between jobs. We make our living one little piece at a time, supplemented by non-theatrical jobs like bartending and waiting tables and teaching and performing at conventions and concerts with symphonies. And in March of 2020, all those things went away too. So it wasn't just our careers evaporating, it was almost every single one of our side hustles too. So to say that this has been a difficult time for the equity community doesn't even scratch the surface. And then George Floyd was killed. And tragically, he wasn't the first, and tragically, he wasn't the last. But his murder ignited a reckoning that nobody could have ignored in good conscience, because it shouldn't have happened. But it did happen, and we all watched it happen. And that tragedy, and so many others, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, I mean, we could spend our entire time together just reading a list of those names, created a new urgency from coast to coast. And it pushed us in very powerful and important ways to look at our industry and our own union through the lens of those who have felt marginalized and voiceless. So theaters across the country began reopening in earnest in summer 2021. Broadway and national tours have followed, though not without challenges or interruptions. But well before that, in the summer of 2020, we faced questions that we knew we had to make time to answer, no matter what it took. What does it look like, this business that we will reopen? How can we face this troubling history that many of us are only now coming to fully understand? What is our organizational accountability? What does the theater industry look like when people go back to work? And how can we make it better? So we got to work. Like the vast majority of organizations in our industry, we offered a statement on our position, recognizing that our own foundation was not free from white supremacy. But we knew that we had a lot more work to do than just a statement. Our industry's bread and butter is beautiful, moving words, but our people needed action and safety and the ability to rebuild trust in institutions that had failed them so many times. So equity has taken a multi-layered approach to address inequality in the theater, whether that inequality comes in the form of harassment, discrimination, access, insensitivity, governance structure, or something else. Everything has been on the table. And while I'm proud of what we've done so far, we are not finished, not even close, but I can give a few examples of the early progress that we've made. We have fundamentally reframed safety, a term of art for unions and one that involves being able to take workers out of the workplace as an environment that is also free of bullying, discrimination, harassment, and racism. We have negotiated this framework into both collective bargaining agreements and reopening safety protocols. What it means is that if racist acts happen inside an equity theater, we treat them with the same kind of urgency we would apply to a show where the set was falling down on actors and stage managers. Having that language in our contracts means that we are far more able to enforce it. We have added hair texture to our list of protected characteristics to be prioritized in future bargaining. We've retrained our staff to be better equipped to handle incoming complaints of workplace problems and better support those who come forward. We have removed our internal time bars for complaints against another member so that those who need time to process trauma can still seek accountability. And we're well into the process of bargaining similar language into our contracts with employers. We are reviewing our vendors. We have prioritized more inclusive hiring and promotion, and we've actually done it. We've elected a new swath of BIPOC members to our national council and committee chair positions, and it's particularly satisfying to see that when we have an internal replacement election, many of these candidates have run uncontested, because that's what making space looks like. I'm really proud of our council for their focus on this change. We have stricken the category of non-resident alien from both our Constitution and our bylaws, clearing obstacles for international actors who want to work within our borders, and then, in turn, proposed and passed a resolution at FIA, the International Federation of Actors, urging performing arts unions around the world to take similar actions. We've created a diversity and inclusion retrofit to look deeply and substantively into every corner of our union for ways that we can clean up our own house. And among the initial actions that came out of the retrofit was open access, a path to membership that does not require someone to be hired on an equity contract in order to join, and instead simply ask them to demonstrate that they have been paid to act or stage manage somewhere. This has allowed us to take access to membership out of the hands of our employers and offer membership to those who have had fewer opportunities simply because of hiring bias in the American theater. We have overhauled our entire committee system, introducing term limits and other parameters for committee chairs so that new voices have a chance to lead. We will be depopulating every committee in the union and then rebuilding each one with deliverable goals for inclusion, along with training on diversity best practices for the chairs. We've also created new affinity groups and action teams so that more actors and stage managers can find communities with those who share their identities and their lived experiences. And we've eliminated name change fees for equity members because they disproportionately impact the trans and non-binary communities. And today, we are releasing a report advising local and state agencies about how they can be a force for change. The arts and entertainment industry generates a larger percentage of our GDP than agriculture or transportation, yet we barely invest in it. Live performing arts is a fiscal engine that drives communities, large and small, all across the country. Yet we lag behind other industries when it comes to paying living wages and other worker protections. And of course, we're viewing this issue through a 2021 lens, which demands that we zoom in on our goal of a truly diverse and inclusive industry. This study lays out the ways in which the old way of doing things disproportionately disadvantages communities with marginalized identities of all kinds, particularly those who have been excluded from the industry because of race and socioeconomic status. Finally, it also recommends measurable improvements to the ways in which arts agencies allocate funding, like reducing requirements for matching funds and minimum budgets, using scorecards, requiring the documentation of DEI practices, and tracking their progress from one grant-making year to another. In addition, of course, to the baseline expectation that organizations that ask for taxpayer dollars be required to pay living wages to their workers, which in itself must be a priority for anyone concerned with social and economic justice. The way to increase DEI in the theater is not to create unpaid internships for BIPOC arts workers. It is to give them seats on the board. Funding is only one facet of creating a truly equitable arts sector. But it is an incredibly important one because these organizations will go where the money goes. And I believe that arts agencies have a moral obligation to look closely at how and where they are allocating these dollars. The time has come. The time is now. Thank you for being here today. I look forward to talking a little further in a couple minutes, but first I am very pleased to introduce to you Britton Smith.
Thank you. I am Britton Smith, and before I read my remarks, I want to say it's such an honor to be here with both of you and speak from my heart. And I wrote remarks because I can speak for so long about this work because I am directly impacted by the systems I'm so passionate about dismantling. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I was raised by a single mom. My dad, most of my life, was previously incarcerated. And I say that because a part of what I think is necessary in building advancement and change forward for not just the people of color in the industry that we're fighting for, but at large is bringing your full self into everything that you do. And I had to constantly advocate for myself in doing that and advocate for others to show up as radically and as truthfully as you can and make the room catch up to who you are instead of you passively adjusting to being behind this beautiful National Press Conference podium that I'm behind. So it's happening right now. I'm very happy to be here. Again, my name is Britton Smith. I'm the president of an arts-based nonprofit called the Broadway Advocacy Coalition. And a lot of our work is around how storytelling and policy link. Since our inception in 2016, we've been dedicated to solving today's most critical issues, including issues of education, inequalities, immigration, and mass incarceration. We began with 6 Black Broadway performers who decided that we needed tools, we needed an understanding of the law to link our passions and our frustration with strategies to participate authentically in creating a more just world. We were seeing things on TV that we knew was unjust, but we weren't quite clear of how in the arena of justice didn't link to what we knew was possible. Like, what are the laws that didn't enable the world we see? What is the actual world that we're living in, and how can we, beyond singing and dancing, participate in the fight against police brutality and mass incarceration? So we built a partnership with Columbia Law School, and Columbia Law School gave us language, it gave us a partnership, it gave us resources, and a methodology that set us up to hold great anger and frustration, great inequality, great pain in the theater during the pandemic that you've heard about from Kate. When George Floyd was murdered, our nation erupted in a way that I've never seen before. And this eruption mirrored a reckoning in the theater industry that we heard for the first time whispers of inequality from everyone of color in our industry. And for the first time publicly, out loud, on Instagram, everywhere, we saw the powers that be challenged. And it forced them to look at themselves in a real way and acknowledge the systems of white supremacy that create the machine of how we work in the theatrical landscape. The Broadway Advocacy Coalition, I say BAC for short, won a special Tony Award this year because of our efforts in supporting our industry and seeing itself more fully. And this awakening involved a lot of hard conversations, a lot of knocking on doors, several conversations with Kate and the union and the Broadway League and people on the ground who need to be heard. It was a tedious, tiring, painful experience that we were all feeling for the efforts of change. But what it really did was it built a sense of community around the people of color. Beyond our text message and our secrets, we were able to come together and find ways of strategizing change together. I believe that people of color are magical, absolutely magical. We possess a set of skills, we possess gifts, we possess style that is innate, it's ancestral, it's beautiful. And the challenge of this magic is that when it's placed in places that are white dominant, like our industry, it creates a lot of discourse that becomes a secret to just participate in this space. But no, 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 no. During this pandemic, all of that secret dissonance became very, very loud. I want to share a story about a conversation I had with a theater industry leader during the reckoning that involved challenge and an awakening. And I promise this is relevant, and but a bit of context before I tell you about this testimony, as I'll call it. My organization, the Broadway Advocacy Coalition, BAC in short, created a 3-day forum that invited 5,000 industry members into a Zoom webinar to learn, to listen, and be held accountable to creating pathways of change. It was when Zoom was sexy, when we were still very excited to log on and witness a forum. And we're in a different place now, and I'm sure everybody's so over it. But at the time, it was revolutionary. We gathered in this Zoom webinar all levels of power within our industry, which included theater owners, actors, producers, people in marketing and casting, creatives, ushers, actors, everybody in our industry set on a 3-day Zoom webinar to listen, to learn, and be held accountable to how we can be a more inclusive, conscious community in building true equity. And that's when the work began. So that's a little bit of context to this story. After that, I was everybody's favorite black friend to knock on the doors and ask, hey, how do I do better? How do we, BAC, please bring us closer, bring us closer. Though frustrating, it created a lot of possibility. And in this story was the beginning of a shift that I'm so excited about. This is a story about a casting director, and it's also a story about the fault of assumption and what happens when there are no mandates to link our values with our new standards of equity and inclusion. So this casting office, I'm gonna make sure it's unnamed, is a well-sized, competitive, popular casting office in New York. They cast for Broadway, regional theaters, TV and film, and for several years has been an all-white casting office with maybe 4 or 5 people of color in the last, give or take, 10 years. Maybe. Anywho, the barrier of entry into casting is a 2-year free labored internship. That's just what it is. And we all know that there are many internships and many industries that do this. We know it's hard, we know we don't like it, but a lot of industries, the way they involve people to participate in their work is this free labor for amount of time. This obviously is a challenge for most, but we know that it mainly affects people who cannot afford to participate. It disproportionately excludes anyone who can't afford it, and in many cases, that's people of color who aren't allowed to participate, no matter how skilled they are. So this casting director and I had a conversation about this barrier and began outlining ways of addressing the harm done to people of color and ways of creating new ways of inclusion for that office, which inspired other offices to do the same. No more free internships. They've built pipelines for casting directors to be able to enter in their business that is paid. They've built scholarships. And though this casting director wasn't intentionally trying to leave out people of color, but there was no moment like this where a global pandemic and a murder of George Floyd that we all saw, there was no moment that would have encouraged this legitimate criticism, and there was no mandate that his office had to dispel free labor and create pipelines of leadership for people of color. So yeah, though it wasn't intentional, a lot of harm was done, and a lot of people were left behind. In talking with the union about federal spending and how billions of dollars can be linked to our values of inclusion and equity, I'm seeing that we can't assume. We can't assume that kind people around the country are going to create programs of pipeline of leadership for people of color. We can't assume that they're going to go to their neighboring communities and connect with the most marginalized so that the children who are deeply, deeply brilliant and magical can create a sense of building their capacity and nurture their gifts in a safe and welcoming environment. So we can't assume, so we have to, in our spending, create ways of restricting and having a mandate, because intentionality and impact become a fine line. I think that it's important that in our opportunities of influence and power, we do what we can to link them to our values in every way that we can. This is the last thing I will say, and then I promise I will shut up so we can have a dynamic conversation, is the biggest thing that BAC is trying to do beyond change policies is unlock in people a change agent role that we all possess. I have a function as an artist to do my gig, learn my lines, show up on time, but I have another set of functions as a change agent to create the world that I see, which involves disruption, which involves storytelling, which involves community building. And we believe that everybody has an unlocking to do. That casting director was able to unlock past his function of casting to link his values to his power. And I think that the world becomes a better place, our community becomes a better place when we understand our role of change beyond our function and our work. So I encourage everybody listening, watching, and in this room to think of what you're doing in your role and how you can link that to the values we see that are important in the evolution of our country. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Wow. So much to discuss. I feel like,
people.
oh no, it's all good. This is so good. I feel like I'm hearing the arts version of Build Back Better. And I'm wondering if I could get the two of you to kind of share with us, although you've outlined multiple things that you want to improve and changes that you want to make, I'm wondering what your biggest challenges that your organization's faced over the past 2 years. And then separately, if you can address what your biggest challenge has been personally in dealing with the changes we've seen since COVID. And Kate, I see a spark in your eye, so if you want to go first.
How much time do we have?
You don't have much. You don't have much. Keep it tight.
I will. I mean, the biggest challenge organizationally, I think, has been the fear of failure, because people are depending on us. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to invite Britton to come here today. Because when you find those people in the industry or in the work that you're trying to do who can grant you the grace to make mistakes and try to do try to do better next time, that's really special. Those are people that you should hold on to. So the reason I say that is because obviously there was a period where people who look like me were advised to just be quiet and listen. And I think that was really important, but ultimately you can get paralyzed by the listening and forget to take any action. The biggest challenge for me personally, I mean, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've done some hard stuff, but it has felt for many, many months like trying to steer a ship steadily through just like a cascade of crises that you can't anticipate. And it feels to me like leadership is about making the best decision you can make with the information that you have. And then if the information changes, you adjust the strategy. But it can be hard to keep a cool head sometimes. People are depending on us.
Yeah, Britton?
I can say easily, our biggest challenge at the Broadway Advocacy Coalition is funding. We have an incredible staff led by people of color who daily dig into making the world a better place, who go to sleep thinking about it, who wake up thinking about it. And as their president, I see them and their hearts and their vision for the world is so beautiful, and they're warriors for making this a better place. And funding is difficult for us. And I spend a lot of time talking to donors, going to dinners and doing all this stuff just to entice people with resources that this work matters and is worth funding. We won a special Tony Award this year, which is fabulous. And the biggest thing I want to come out of that is people to see, wow, that's a legitimate group. We have to fund them. And so, yes, funding. So if you have resources and dollars out there and you want to give to an organization that is doing great work and great heart and a mission and strategies of change, give us your dollars. Personally, the work that is challenging for me is I signed up to be an artist, right? I want to sing. It comes back to me when I sing. And this work of sharing and changing doesn't always come back to you in the way that you want it to. So my challenge as a baby advocate, I'll say, is finding moments to restore myself, you know? And I can't imagine how my past leaders were able to do that. I think it's a lot of work, and I signed up to be an artist, and there's art in this, but this work is hard, and so I'm figuring out ways to replenish myself and heal myself in this work while doing this work.
Well, I like to keep it light, as I told you before we started, so we might find an opportunity for you to sing at the end of this.
Oh my.
But before we get to that,
let's
talk about the report. So the report that you released today, it does a lot of things. It's like you're addressing two things: compensation, income inequality, wage standards. What are you hoping that releasing the report today will do, and who are you directing your message to?
First of all, I should have mentioned that the report's available on our website, actorsequity.org. And I have a lot of hope for this. I think that there are lots of well-intentioned people who want to do things the right way, but haven't been able to get the distance to zoom out on their processes and see what they could adjust. And so the report is really aimed at providing goals and deliverables for agencies that are making, that are giving money or making grants to arts organizations. And there are really concrete action steps in there. For example, what is the application? What's not on the application that should be on the application? How can you measure an organization's DEI progress, or allow them to measure it and then report it to you? How can we hold them accountable? How can we make sure that, like I said a few minutes ago, that theaters that get taxpayer dollars are actually turning around and spending that money on fair wages for their workers, even if they also want to renovate their lobby? How can arts agencies ensure that the money they give out is not being put toward misclassifying workers and removing workplace protections that should be in place?
So you're talking a lot about grant money and money coming from the federal government. What about reaching out to private donors and foundations and other organizations? Isn't that like where the real money is?
Well, I think that's part of it too. And obviously this is targeted at arts agencies, but I think anyone who wants to donate to a theater could make some use of it, but just by asking questions. It's probably not going to be as exhaustive an application process, but knowing which kinds of questions to ask. What's your board composition look like? Do you allow board members to participate if they can't personally make financial donations? I think anybody can use a lot of this information.
Britton, Broadway, of course, doesn't rely on grants. So you guys have made, at BAC, you've made some significant progress in opening doors and those houses and to those who manage. But I mean, what does your path look like in the funding zone? I mean, you were quite blunt that funding is an issue, but what steps are you taking to get the money that you need?
Yeah, we're asking people, in unlocking your change agent role, sometimes your way of participating in making the world a better place is spending your money where it's going to be well spent. And though Broadway isn't run by grants, there's a lot of money in Broadway. It's a big business. And so I'm directly connecting with people who have a lot of resources to give and asking them, where are you spending your money, and what does your money and your resources look like in the hands of people who are trying to make your space more equitable? You're missing a whole gap of inclusion, of equity, of making sure that people can show up to your workplace and feel like they can be their fullest selves. Who are you hiring? There's no role of that in theater. So there's a big gap that BAC is providing, and we're not doing it for free. Mm-hmm. And we also want to make people see that if you invest in this work, you're investing in a better quality of the work you're asking to create. And it's also not free.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that a number of people, when they think Broadway, they think New York, they think Washington, D.C., they think L.A.
Mm-hmm.
How does this apply locally or regionally?
I'm from Dallas, Texas, and the Dallas Theater Center is a huge place in Dallas for theater. And I think that storytelling is not linked only to Broadway. And the issues of storytelling in the American theater are the issues of storytelling in the American theater. It's not unique to Broadway. I do think that challenging the most influential hope is that when Broadway does better, there's an influence of how it trickles down into these other regional theaters who are already looking at Broadway as a grandfather of hope. So we're asking them to redefine what they think success is and share that with the other theaters. And we're directly connecting. Thank God for Zoom now. Zoom is a way of reaching beyond your neighborhood and teaching. And we have a workshop called Reimagining Equitable Productions that brings BAC into first day of rehearsal processes and asks people to build a set of values. And we can do that over Zoom, over 2 hours, over 4 hours, and it makes it more accessible to mobilize what we're doing beyond just our theater community in New York.
It's interesting that you said trickle down, because trickle down is sometimes not such a great phrase, especially not in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Exactly. But that's okay, because it works, I imagine, differently for a different set of policies or productions, as it were.
It might also be more of I visualize it more as a flow outward from one geographical location to another, because Broadway doesn't have to be the barometer by which we judge all the rest of the theater in the country. Some of the best theater I've ever seen or participated in was in regional theaters. And a couple of the things I wish I maybe hadn't done were in New York, So live performing arts anchoring an economy is a scalable model. And you see it in Greenville, South Carolina, you see it in old Las Vegas, you see it all over the country, many parts of Washington, D.C., where theaters come in and generate lots of interest, but also additional revenue for the businesses around them.
Okay. Let's talk about the current state of play when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are there state or local art agencies around the country that are doing it right, in your opinion, when it comes to promoting diversity on stage? And who are the bad actors? Excuse the pun, but yeah.
I would offer, and this is in the report as well, there are a couple examples of good actors, right? The couple programs, the Seattle, Los Angeles, New York has done well, but a really good example of an entity that's doing it well is the National Endowment for the Arts, because they do ensure that things like worker protections and DEI are involved in their granting process.
But were they doing it well during the previous administration, and are you seeing more hope in the current administration?
I mean, I am hopeful. I see it a real evolution that's happened over the last several years. And part of it, honestly, is because equity has been more vocal and other unions have been more vocal in saying, listen, if you're going to give out money, please think of the workers. If the government was building a toll booth, this is an example that a lot of people around equity use, whether or not they paid prevailing wage and hired people on union contracts would be a foregone conclusion. But the fact that what we do looks like a lot of fun and often is a lot of fun, we're sort of trying to convince an audience that they are seeing something real up on that stage, but it's actually a group of workers playing pretend. And I think that it can be hard for people to, for audience members, for example, to think of those workers while they're being entertained by a show.
Britton, did you want to say something on that?
I'll pass.
You're going to pass?
Yes, thank you.
Why did it take a pandemic and a diversity uprising for this to happen? Was this not already on people's minds, and was it not impacting, say, women already in the business?
Can you take a stab?
Yeah, I think that the pandemic and George Floyd in particular did something to us uniquely. And on a spiritual level, I think it was necessary. None of it is asked for. Devastation, loss, so much devastation. I don't think anybody would want that, but there's an unlocking that I can't see happening without that pause and that pain. And I think there's something being birthed out of that with individuals. I think it's easy for an institution and for an organization to gather thought because they've already built a house. But we saw a bunch of individuals come together. That is bigger than policy. I think it's about culture, and like culture is more powerful than policy. And I think this moment created culture change. Through great devastation and pain, it created a cultural shift. And that has legs, real legs.
I think for us, for equity, first of all, it shouldn't have taken as long as it did, but it did. And certainly 2020 was not the first time we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or women's issues. It certainly pointed up things like intersectionality in a way that I don't think we had considered them as urgently before. But I would say that pre-pandemic, our work in this sphere was along the lines of marginal gains. You know, equity, diversity, and inclusion was something on a long list of priorities that we were trying to accomplish when we sat down at a bargaining table. During the pandemic, it became very clear that this needed to be, if not the item at the, pardon me, at the top of the list, one of the top three. You know, other things that we would negotiate for needed to be secondary. We needed to make sure people were safe.
Has COVID permanently changed live theater, you think?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
You don't know?
I think I think in live theater, there's a term called, there's just like these phrases like, I can't think of them right now. Like if you're sick, the show must go on.
Yes.
Right,
You know,
the show must go
there are
on.
certain things, and like we're seeing major shows not go on because of health. And I don't think that's going to stop. I think we've changed our need to muster through no matter what. Like if your leg is hurt, get out there. If you are sneezing and you are coughing, baby, go home. That is a new thing for the theater. I've seen people have bronchitis and try to go out because there's this sense of like, as an artist, I have to go on. I have to. And that's changing. I can't see us going back to that. Now, will we always wear masks? Will we go back to stage door, which is like signing playbills after? Some of that may, but the things in the culture of health, I think are gonna stick. I hope they stick.
I don't think that COVID has fundamentally changed people's appetite to be in a dark room together and collectively experience storytelling. I'm not worried about that.
But do you think people want to sit close to each other, like for over an hour, not necessarily with a mask, or maybe with a mask on? I mean, the comfort level, do you think that's there?
I think that ultimately it will be. It's just a question of when everybody reaches that comfort level again. But I agree with Britton. Things like, these stories that we've heard over the years of, an actor going on stage and doing the show, and the audience never would have known that they ran off stage and threw up in a bucket. Like, that's not legendary anymore. That's pretty stupid. And I hope that things like working sick or injured, things like feeling like you have to live in poverty without your needs being met in order to do what we do. That's the how of doing theater that I think has changed. Because if we don't adjust the things that we expect of our industry based on what we've learned, then what did we just live through that for? Like, let's use the opportunity to understand how we can make it better.
Yeah, and I think we saw a little bit of that with the Olympics and Simone Biles, right? She really put that out there. Was there anyone in the theater sphere that really stood out for you who said, you know what, that's it for me?
Yes. Adrienne Warren, who I can say is Tony Award-winning Adrienne Warren for her role of Tina in Tina the Musical. Woof! Fabulous, so fabulous. She was asked to do the unthinkable, 8 shows a week. I mean, the role itself, vocally and physically, is just, it's for an athlete, and she is one of our strongest athletic artists. And there were moments when her legs would not do what I'm sure her mind and her heart wishes they could do, and she would say, I'm out of the show today, and because I'm not well, and I want to give my best. And the theater audiences who really love theater can be vicious. I mean, they want you to be, what do you mean you're calling out? I flew from Oklahoma to see you. But, and so that pressure on an artist is real. And I'm sure Adrienne wanted to, every show, give to anybody who wanted to experience her and that cast and the show itself. But saying I can't is heroic in the theater industry. And I saw her do it when she needed to. And I think it inspired others who are in school, who are learning, what does it mean to be a leading lady in a show? It no longer means you have to be this huge machine of a human. You get to be human in this art form, which I think she exemplified.
Well, since we're in Washington and you're releasing the report today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the politics around it. Maria Rosario Jackson was recently nominated by President Biden to lead the National Endowment for the Arts. What do you think about this appointment, and what do you think the NEA can do to speed the recovery of arts and culture?
I have not met with her yet, but I'm really interested too. I know that our staff's had a really positive meeting with some of her staff, and she's been a great leader prior to this. I'm looking forward to working with her. I think that the NEA does a pretty good job so far. The NEA could do more with more money, but obviously that's not up specifically to the NEA. We need our legislators to allocate the kind of investment in the arts that the government gives to other sectors. So,
talk a little bit about how important arts and culture is for different states. I mean, because you didn't touch on the bad actors like I asked you to before, and I mean it's worth us pointing them out. I mean, this is the place to do it. I mean, there are places that could do better, right?
Well, sure. I mean, and it's hard to paint with a broad brush, and it's not my favorite thing to call out individual organizations without a pretty thorough study of everything that they do. But for example, there was recently a study released about certain off-Broadway theaters that still rely heavily on unpaid labor in order to make their shows happen. Now, producing theater is hard. That's why I don't do it. I tried it, and it's very difficult, especially now. But at the same time, I think that theater makers have a moral obligation to compensate their artists for the work and the labor that they do. I can't understand why anyone who is running a theater and maybe there's just something I don't know, but why anybody who's running a theater would make sure to pay for the sets, pay for the costumes, pay for the lumber, and then ask an actor to come in and work without compensation or for a small stipend that that doesn't offer them, for example, access to workers' comp if they get injured in the theater, because what we do is actually dangerous. There are thousands of pounds of scenery sometimes flying around over our heads. If they get injured or if they get COVID in the workplace. I mean, that's got to be something on the minds of everyone right now. So making sure that that theater producers appropriately classify and compensate their people, it seems to me like it would be step one.
A question that came in before the event online from someone who is ready for this event asked, over the past 2 years, the federal government created unprecedented programs like the Shuttered Venues Operators grants to help economically hard-hit small clubs and concert venues. Actors and others in the arts were able to qualify for unemployment insurance when they were previously barred. Have there been any other forms of support, and what more is needed? That's the question.
Do you want to offer anything?
I am an actor who needs more support, even as a leader in this, and I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, sure. I just feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, please.
Yeah, look, enhanced unemployment was an amazing thing, and it allowed people to sustain themselves and their families for a period of time when they literally had no other income. And when it came, when the tax bill came due, a lot of people owed money that they didn't have for collecting that unemployment. It is really hard to concisely sum up the difficulty that COVID has brought to our theatrical community. There's an amazing organization called the Actors Fund, and they regularly help out people, not just actors, but everybody in the entertainment industry and live theater and film and TV. They've done a lot of surveys and research on people who have come to them for help, whether it's emergency rental assistance so that they don't get evicted, or paying their mortgage so they don't get foreclosed. I mean, they do all that through donations, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the number of people who are theater makers who have had food insecurity or housing insecurity or mental health crises, I mean, it feels like everyone I know has gone through a period where they just lost their ability to process what's happened in our industry and to our friends in our community. Fortunately, if there's any silver lining, it seems to happen on a rolling basis so that we can support and help each other. But it's hard to talk about what it feels like to be unemployed for almost 2 years and maybe lose your home and maybe give up on the industry because you're not sure when you might get a job again, and just have this all sort of taken overnight.
Why should people in general care about government grants for the arts?
I mean, my simple answer to that would be because I believe most people want to do the right thing more than they want to do the wrong thing, and they just aren't quite sure what the steps are. But I'm hopeful.
I think that, do you think that, or in my mind, as a normal person, the idea of people think in general that you guys are making a ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, how do you overcome that kind of perception so that you reach the folks who might give you $5 or something like that? Talk about that.
I would say storytelling. I think people need to hear of real experiences. In 2015, I was commissioned by the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York to work with homeless queer youth. And it was one of the most rewarding, challenging experiences I could have ever done. Some of the youth were 13 and homeless, and actively transitioning. Like transitioning is already very difficult. Being homeless and transitioning and dealing with your hormones and poverty and sex work. I mean, it was a very challenging thing. And I went in there thinking, I'm going to teach them art and I'm going to teach them this, this, and this. And really, they were very resistant to us coming in and teaching them something when all they really wanted was like to be seen, listened, laughed, bought pizza for, and cared for, right? And something that came out of being in that space is I met someone, her name was India, and she wanted to be an actress. And she already had this level of confidence that I'm gonna be an actress. And then years later, I look up in a Times Square building, and she's a lead actress in Pose. Her name is India Moore, and she's a huge star now. And I can't say that the grant itself provided that for India, but I will say that being a part of that program and being able to just have access to care and be with someone who needed care and like reassurance and like affirmation, I hope that informed her encouragement to pursue. And now she's an advocate for change in a way that we can't always link where that came from, but she's changing the world. And I believe that that grant from the Department of Cultural Affairs played a role in that we're all benefiting from.
Well, I've got one final question, but before we get to it, I need to take a moment to thank the organizers of today's event. Our headliners, co-team leaders, Donna Laiwan Leger and Lori Russo. The headline team leaders, team member who organized today's event, Jamie Horowitz. Club Communications Director, Kate Helster, and Club Executive Director, Bill McCarron. And I want to tell folks who are listening today and watching that we'd love for you to join us. My final headliner for 2020 is an interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci. And I'll be talking to him about COVID and about Omicron and all of that. So please come back and join us on December 20th when I'll be talking to Dr. Fauci about that. And then we're going to kick off the 2022 election year with a look at changing state election laws and what that means for voters. And we're going to hold a headliners panel on that as a part of, with a panel of democracy advocates on January 13th. So, final question, and it was kind of hard to come up with this because I knew I was dealing with some creatives today. But I'm wondering if there's anything, any movie or TV series that in your mind would have been done much better as a theater production. And if you could share that with us, if there's one that comes to mind. I know it's like, you're like, God, oh my God, what kind of question is that? But is there something you can think of that you would have said, you know, they really should have done that on theater, or a theater production that wasn't that great but probably should have been a TV series?
I could make a much faster and longer list of movies and TV shows that should not have been turned into musicals.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that, though.
One that comes to mind is Sister Act. Oh, it was already a musical. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next one that came to mind was Best in Show. I think having like 6 fabulous actors and a bunch of dogs on a stage is hilarious.
Or, what was the one that just flashed through my brain? Waiting for Guffman. I mean, it's like a perfect movie, right? So it's always scary when somebody tries to adapt a really excellent movie, because you think, well, how can they make it anything but a less awesome version of what it was in its first form? But I can just imagine the licensing for that show, because people would love watching it, but then they'd want to do it all over the country. That's one of our big ones.
Can I ask what yours would be?
No. You know, I don't think I've ever had anyone this year turn the tables on me and ask me a question. I actually don't know, but I was thinking about Annie, the production of Annie, and how I just really wish they would stop trying to do that for TV. I really wish that they would continue to just leave that on theater because on the stage, because I think that's where it belongs.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's just the honest to God truth.
I just rewatched Chicago last week, which I haven't seen in a few years. And as great as it is on stage, like there are times when film can just do things like that Cell Block Tango number.
Yeah.
Maybe my favorite musical number ever committed to film. So when you get a really great theatrical director like Rob Marshall, who also knows how to film things, it becomes a whole different animal that you experience in different ways. So I do think that the two can coexist, but sometimes there's a lot of cross-pollination.
Okay. Well, Kate, Britton, thank you so much for coming to the National Press Club. I want to give you want to pass that over? The coveted National Press Club mug. Your second one, I think.
It is my second
Yes.
one, and
Britton, your first one.
I'm honored.
Thank you so much for coming to the National Press Club and for releasing the report. You want to give one more plug for where folks can find the report?
Sure, actorsequity.org.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.